my name is Rob Gillis, and I'm at the Riverfront Park in Hudson, New York. Despite being over 100 miles from the Atlantic Ocean, Hudson was an important whaling port in the late 18th to early 19th centuries. Today, the official seal of the city of Hudson is a whale. You can also see a symbol of a whale on the street signs in Hudson and above the door of a retail store on Warren Street. The city of Hudson had its beginning as a small Dutch hamlet called Claverick Landing on the Hudson River. It was a land grant secured from Native Americans in 1662. Before the American Revolution, most of the whaling commerce was between the island of Nantucket and Great Britain. With the beginning of the war, Nantucket had been blockaded by the British Navy. Many of the whaling ships were forced to remain in port. Others were boarded at sea and their crews impressed into the British Navy. When the war ended, the Nantucket whalers hoped to regain their whaling trade. However, Great Britain imposed a heavy tariff on whale oil. This was a blow to Nantucket's economy. A group of merchants decided to leave the island with their families and find a place free from the threat of the British Navy. Two brothers, Seth and Thomas Jenkins, were selected to look for a deep water port along the Hudson River. They first checked an area along Manhattan, but it proved to be too expensive to purchase. However, they decided on Claverick Landing. They included whaling merchants from Providence, Rhode Island, and Martha's Vineyard. These New England settlers became to be known as the proprietors. The proprietors quickly set up a grid of planned streets and divided building lots among themselves. Houses were constructed along the waterfront and on the streets heading inland from the river. The proprietors renamed Claverick Landing Hudson in honor of the explorer Henry Hudson. In 1785, the city of Hudson was charted. Hudson attracted all kinds of shipping and commerce. This included shipbuilding, sail-making, rope making, and whaling. By 1786, Hudson boasted a fleet of 25 whaling vessels. In 1790, the city of Hudson became a port of entry and had a population of 2,500. The majority of the whales that were hunted were sperm whales, large, toothed animals whose huge heads contained a most valuable liquid called spermaceti. It was processed to make candles that burned cleanly and had high illuminating power. The spermaceti candles were in great demand in America and abroad in Europe. The oil from sperm whale blubber was used in public lighting and private lighting. Also, ambergris, a solid, waxy, flammable substance produced in the digestive system of whales, was used in making expensive perfumes. The teeth of the sperm whale were valued as a source of engraved artwork created by whalers called scrimshaw. Now, for an in-depth explanation of the whale hunt, I interviewed Eric J. Dolan, the author of the book Leviathan, The History of Whaling in America.
The whalemen were out on their whale ships. There would be one or two men at the top of the main mast on the cross trees. They'd be looking out towards the horizon, trying to find a telltale spout of a whale in the distance, and if they saw that spout, that mist rising up into the air, they would yell "whale off" or "whale in the distance," and they would point in the direction where the whale was seen, so the people down on the deck below would be made aware of that, and then there'd be a race on board because there were multiple whale boats, these 24, 25 foot long, half-inch cedar clapboard rowboats, essentially, that were hanging off davits on the side of the whale ship, and there'd be multiple crews that would hop into their whale boats. They'd be lowered down into the water, and there'd be a race to get to the whale first, because the whaleboat crew that got to the whale first sometimes got a little extra incentive, and they certainly got bragging rights. Once they got within sight of the whale, they had to be very careful, but they also had to go very close, because you couldn't throw a harpoon from 30 or 40 feet away and expect it to do any damage or really stick into the whale, because whales, even though they're surrounded by blubber, it's not like our fat. It's not soft. It's very dense and fibrous. So if you wanted a harpoon to go into a whale deep, which was necessary to get a good hold, you had to be within maybe 10 or 15 feet, if not closer, to the whale. It was something called skin to black skin, or the wood to black skin. You wanted to get the boat right up next to the whale, and then the harpooner would rear back and he'd pitch his harpoon into the flank of the whale, and if he had time and was lucky, he would be able to pitch a second harpoon, and these harpoons were attached to the whale boat by a rope, which was coiled inside of the boat, and the harpooned whale, of course, would immediately take off. It would try to get away from this boat, and that's where the Nantucket sleigh ride, so-called, would begin, because the rope would be tied off the bow of the whale boat, and wherever the whale went, the whale boat would follow, sometimes racing as fast as 15 or 20 knots, and being one of the fastest things on the ocean, at least human things on the ocean. Hopefully, the whale wouldn't sound. If the whale sounded, which meant dive, then the whaleman could be in serious trouble. And that's why there was always a person standing at the bow of the boat with a hatchet in his hand, because if the whale decided to go down into the depths, they didn't want the whaleboat to be dragged down after it. So they would cut the rope and hopefully save the whaleboat. But there were instances in which whaleboats were dragged right under the water. And that was very dangerous for the men, because many whalemen in the late 1700s and early 1800s, and even in the mid-1800s, did not know how to swim. So if they landed in the water and they didn't grab onto something that floated, they might very well drown. So let's say that you are attached to a whale. The whale is pulling the whaleboat. It tires out the whale. After a while, the boat pulls in closer and closer because the whale is not going as fast. And then when they get very close to the whale, the boat header will take a lance, which is a long pole at the end of which is a very sharp knife or blade, and they will thrust it into the whale, looking for the life of the whale, which is either the lungs or a knot of blood vessels that are near the lungs. And success will show itself as a geyser of blood coming out of the whale's blowhole. If you were dealing with a sperm whale, there was trouble at both ends, because there was the battering ram of the head, and there was the big jaw, which would be chomping around. So sometimes whaleboats got stuck in a whale's jaw and were chomped. And they also had a very powerful tail, which was called by whalemen the hand of God, because if it came down on your whaleboat, you were going to meet your maker. So at the end of this final flurry, if the whale died, it would go fin out, and then it would be towed back to the mother ship. And once at the mother ship, the processing would begin. They would basically tie the whale up to the side of the ship. They'd have the cutting stages out, and they'd start slicing the whale's blubber off, sort of like taking the rind of an orange off or an apple in one continuous swirl, bringing the heavy blanket pieces of blubber higher and higher, then cutting them lengthwise and bringing them on board, where the processing would continue. The blubber would be cut into smaller and smaller pieces, and then it would be pitched into a tripod, which has it's an iron tripod which has a fire underneath it. That would melt down all of the blubber. They would siphon off the oil, put it in casks to be held below. With the sperm whale in particular, they would also cut off the head of the sperm whale. They would bring the jaw, because the jaw had sperm whale teeth in it. Those teeth were not valuable commercially, but they were used by the whalemen to make scrimshaw and other products that were either sent home to their sweethearts or sometimes sold as trinkets when they got back from the whaling voyage. But the main prize came within the head of the sperm whale, and that was the spermaceti organ. They would cut a hole in the top of the bulbous head of the sperm whale, and one of the smallest guys on the ship, sometimes a boy, would actually dunk himself into the spermaceti organ and scoop out this spermaceti oil, which was very thick and white. And then actually some people believe that that's where the term spermaceti comes from, because it reminded them of sperm, but there are other theories as well. Basically, after many hours, sometimes trying out of a whale could take an entire day, if not longer. And these whale ships were kind of smelled before they were seen, because as you can imagine, the burning of flesh has a very acrid odor, and it's wafting over the ocean. So burning out at night, they would present a very sort of spooky scene on the ocean, because in the distance you would see bright light in the center of the ship, which is where the try-works were, from the flames that were boiling down all of the whale blubber, and then smoke rising from the deck of the ship.
The whaling vessels were designed to carry a large crew of men, up to 37 individuals, and store hundreds of barrels of whale oil. The large whale ships were the three-masted square riggers. These ships would be out on whale voyages of several years. A slightly smaller vessel used in whaling was a bark. Then there was the two-masted brig. The smallest vessel was the schooner that would be out for 6 months. It was much more economical to outfit and had a smaller crew. Whaling ships from Hudson sailed the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans in search of sperm whales. The period from 1786 through 1817 saw the greatest activity. However, it trailed off due to a general downturn of Hudson's economy. However, in 1830, the whaling trade picked up again. It ended with the last whaling ship returning to Hudson in 1845. There are several reasons why whaling ended in Hudson. By the 1840s, New Bedford, Massachusetts had become the largest whaling center in the United States. It was more profitable to sail whaling ships from its large wharfs than to sail up the Hudson River. Another reason was an alternative illuminating oil called camphene, a blend of turpentine and alcohol that came on the market in the mid-1830s. It was much cheaper than whale oil and was produced in great quantities. Whale oil lamps could easily be upgraded to use camphene. The whaling trade profited Hudson for 60 years. It was the main reason for its founding. Today, it is important to remember those New England whalers who sailed up the Hudson River and established the city of Hudson.